Hey there, and welcome back to the Total Transition Podcast, where we explore the transition journey with a focus on humanity at the center of it. I'm Jordana McGonigal, your host and the CEO of the Recon Network. And every other week, we bring you inspiring stories from veterans who have successfully navigated their own transitions. Yes, it can be done. And some practical insights from experts in all aspects of living fully and holistically within humanity. This week, we are talking with Annie Brock. I'm really excited about this one. I know I say that every week, but I really am. Now, Annie is a former Army paratrooper. She's a helicopter pilot with a deep passion for mindset, communication, and leadership. Her personal journey through the military, combined with her experiences as an Air Force spouse, has shaped her belief in the power of resilience and growth. And in 2018, she founded the Leader Transition Institute, a Maryland-based nonprofit organization with a mission to support service members, veterans, and their spouses as they transition from military service to civilian careers. So, Annie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I'm excited about this one. In May, when you guys will be hearing this, is Military Spouse Month. So you've got a lot of great insight on that. I love working with organizations that look beyond the single individual and at the ripple effects that affect the whole family. But the very first thing that we need to do is what we always do, is really talk about your journey to this point. So how did you end up getting into the military? What does that decision look like for you? And then what was your career like while you were there?
Well, like so many people, I ended up in the military because I needed a roof over my head and I wanted to eat. So I was a military child. I graduated from high school at a very young age, ended up in an Ivy League college in its second co-ed class, and was kicked out before I turned 18 after 2 years. So with that,
setting the stage.
So with that auspicious start to my life and huge hit to my self-esteem,
right,
I finished my bachelor's degree at the University of New Hampshire, where I had a double major in political science and psychology, and was fortunate enough to get a summer internship working for one of New Hampshire's senators, Senator John Durkin. And he and his team promised me a job when I graduated from UNH, and I was all in on that. That just sounded like a really amazing thing to me. But in the meantime, the senior senator from New Hampshire decided to retire. And the tradition on Capitol Hill then, and probably pretty similarly now, is that then the junior member, or the member that's staying, the senator, since each state has two, the senator that's staying hires on as much of the outgoing senator's staff as they can, which meant that there wasn't a job for me. So my parents were traveling around the world at the time when I graduated from college. My father was on sabbatical from the university where he taught, and they were in Africa, and they had rented our house out, and I wasn't allowed to go anywhere near it. And my father had made arrangements for me to go stay with an old military friend of his and his wife outside of Washington, D.C., a couple that I had never met in my life.
That's fun. That's
awesome. And so I went off. I drove down and took the metro into Washington from Northern Virginia every day, just going and looking for a job. I didn't even type well enough to get a job as a secretary. But every day as I approached the metro, I walked by an Army recruiting office. And one day I just decided to go in because I had been a military child. The uniforms, looked familiar to me. So I went in, and I was theirs because I was a sucker just looking for a job. And back then things moved pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So I took the test one day. They told me I could have almost any job in the Army I wanted because I scored so high. I took my physical the second day, and by the fourth day, I was on my way to basic training.
Whoa, that is fast. There's no time to rethink that.
No. And
Time for anything.
So
You're in there.
the colonel that I was staying with, he called and talked to the recruiter, and the recruiter appropriately lied, with telling him all the answers that he knew the So-6 wanted to hear about this being a good thing for me. And yep, there I went. I left my car at a parking lot at Fort Meade, outside of Baltimore, near BWI, and they put us on a train from Baltimore to Fort Jackson. That was where we were going to get our uniforms and all of that. And I honestly can remember standing in the office at Fort Meade after having raised my right hand and bursting into absolute tears, asking, could I undo what I had just done? And they said no.
No, sorry.
So got on the train. They were kind enough to tell me that since I was an E3, since I had a college degree, and I was the highest ranking person of these new recruits on the train, they scattered us among cars, and I remember some of this stuff. It comes back to me as I talk about this. I remember being told that if we all had to arrive, if we didn't all arrive at Fort Jackson, if anybody got off the train at any of the stops in between, it was an overnight train, I was the one who was going to get in trouble, because I was the senior ranking person, so I was responsible to make sure that everybody scattered on this train who was supposed to go got there. And I'm sure they just did that to scare me, because there was no way I could keep track of it. And I have no idea whether we all arrived. I didn't get into any trouble for it, but I can remember we arrived at they called it the replacement detachment, and we were supposed to go get all our uniforms and all this kind of stuff. That very first night, I learned how to work a buffer. And we spent about 3 or 4 days there getting our uniforms and duffel bags. They took away my nice suitcases of clothes that I should wish somebody had just told me to leave them in my car in Maryland, and so then I got shipped to Fort Gordon, Georgia, because I had signed up to be a telecommunications center operator. Well, actually, that's not the truth. I signed up to be a combat telecommunications center operator, but what I heard was telecommunications center operator, because I had learned at Dartmouth how to program computers, and I knew computers were in big air-conditioned buildings, and I figured that was a safe thing to do.
Except for that part that you missed.
But that little part that I missed meant that we spent some time in a classroom in a nice air-conditioned building, but in reality, the bulk of our training was in the back of military vehicles.
Wow. That's quite a management of expectations thing going on there, right?
And I can remember when we got to Fort Gordon, and they put us in a bus, and they put our duffel bags into the back of a Duesenhof. And we drove over to where our training area was going to be. Back then it was called One Station Unit Training. And so we were there for basic and AIT. And I can remember standing around the back of this Duesenhof as the drill sergeants, or somebody, pretty sure it was the drill sergeants, were throwing the duffel bags off the back of the truck. And one woman's duffel bag broke open, and these pink foam rollers went everywhere. And they wanted to know whose they belonged to. And she was too scared to say anything. I couldn't have told you who they belonged to, and I wouldn't have, ratted her out anyway. And so that I can just remember being, oh my gosh, that was just such a fiasco. That's what I remember of my arrival at Fort Gordon. Wow. So it was January when I got there. It snowed that year at Fort Gordon, and I can remember low crawling around the barracks with my M16 cradled in my arms as punishment for some infraction that somebody in our platoon had done. And we didn't even have jackets on. We were just out there in our uniforms, low crawling around the barracks with our M16s. And I can remember that I was, again, the senior person. And so I was responsible for the women at night. And I didn't know that women fought and hit each other. I didn't know that women would steal each other's underwear. It was an adventure that I had no idea I was going to experience.
Right. I've always told some people, if anyone needs proof that women are ready for combat, they just need to look at siblings and how they interact. Look at
Yeah,
two
and that's
sisters
probably
and
what we
you'll
were
see
like.
it.
We were probably like 22 siblings and it was
Right.
one of the old Quonset hut barracks. The doors, there was a 2-inch gap outside the door, from the top bottom of the door to the cement floor, so the building was never warm with
Right.
the winter cold. But when most of us made it through, I made it through. I can remember I was not in very good physical shape. I started out in size 16 uniforms. I don't know how I passed the physical, but I didn't have a waiver, so I must have passed the physical somehow. And I ended up with shin splints, and I can remember doing road marches on crutches with a backpack because I wasn't going to quit. And so I struggled through as the platoon leader. I ate last, and so generally, I would stand at the door to the dining facility as the platoon went in, and then I had just enough time to get my tray of food and get in line at the back of the turn in your tray line and stand there and eat what I could before I got there. And so between that and the physical exercise, I was down to a size 10 when I left. So
That'll do it.
yeah, that'll do it. So from there, I had also ended up signing my contract to go to the 82nd Airborne Division, which meant that I needed to go to jump school en route. So I went there from Fort Gordon, and that was another whole adventure. You can see there's a helmet on the shelf over my shoulder, and I bought that at a used place because I didn't keep my steel pot when I left. But amazingly enough, it has a dent in it in exactly the place where I can remember hitting my head on my very first jump. The Army's jump school is a 3-week course, and it took me 9 weeks to get through. I didn't fail anything. I got hurt. The flu went through our barracks. There were cycle breaks, and then I hit my head on my first jump. I wanted to go, but they medevaced me. That was my first helicopter ride that day too. They medevaced me to the helicopter to the ER at Fort Benning, and the doctor there threatened to send me for a psych eval because I wanted to go right back and finish my jumps. And they wanted to keep me for another 4 days, or at least for overnight. But I had to go back. I went back the next afterwards and did my last 4 jumps and finished that up. So I started out as Whiskey 7. I finished as Juliet Tango Golf Whiskey 7. And because I'm allergic to bee stings, they put the letters BS on the side of my helmet to alert anybody that if I fell over on the drop zone, they should check to see if I had been stung by a bee. I ended up with letters and numbers all around my helmet.
Right. And BS
So,
tattooed right on the back. Like if she
yeah.
goes down, it's because of BS.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
So, yep. So from there, I went to Fort Bragg, and that was where I found out that my contract was actually faulty. I couldn't be assigned to the 82nd because they didn't accept enlisted women into the signal battalions. And I was given a choice to either go over to 18th Airborne Corps or to stay in the 82nd and retrain into another MOS. And I knew to do some quick checking about this, and I found out that the women who in the 18th Airborne Corps who had my MOS spent most of their time in the motor pools fixing the vehicles that they needed to go out on, and that was not my thing, never my thing. My husband will tell you to this day. I go out with the key, get in the car, and drive off. If it has 4 tires on it, it's because he made sure there were 4 tires. And so I was lucky enough to go to the 407th Supply and Service Battalion as administrative clerk, eventually became the battalion legal clerk. And from there, that was my first opportunity to transition. My enlistment expired while I was there, and I didn't have a plan. I thought I was going to get out, but I got scared, and I went and I said, "Can I stay on active duty?" And they said, "Sure, but we're going to make sure that you become an officer because you should not have an enlisted career." So they tried to help me get a direct commission into the Army's Quartermaster Corps because it was a logistics battalion. They felt like they had enough connections there. I got turned down. That was no problem. I would go to, by that time, I had enough self-confidence to go to officer candidate school. And they told me that no officer left the 82nd without being jumpmaster qualified. So they sent me to jumpmaster school. And it was while I was at jumpmaster school that I got a notification from the Medical Service Corps that I was going to get a direct commission from them. And it turned out that the commander of the Med Battalion had somehow gotten a copy of my application, walked it down the hall in Washington to the Medical Service Corps, and I got a letter saying, "Hey, you're going to pin on second lieutenant on this day." So I did that. Went to my officer basic course in Fort Sam Houston. One day they came in and talked to us about going to jump school. Been there, done that.
Mm-hmm.
Going to air assault school. All I knew about air assault school was rappelling out of helicopters, which was okay. But the training involved running around in groups of 4 or 5 people carrying a tree log or a telephone pole on your shoulder. That did not sound fun to me at all. And so I didn't want to do that. And then they started talking about flight school. And it sounded really exciting. And I figured I could drive a car. Somebody could teach me how to fly an airplane or fly a helicopter. So I raised my hand. And out of the 5 of us in my class who volunteered for that, I was the only one who passed the physical and passed the test and the interviews. And so I ended up next at flight school.
Wow. That's a wild ride already, guys.
Yep. So I did flight school, finished on time, and spent a few months at the Flatiron, the medevac unit at Fort Rucker, and then went to the 63rd Medical Detachment, which then was co-located. It doesn't exist anymore, but then it was not adjacent, but like a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away from the Landstuhl Army Regional Medical Center up the hill from Ramstein in Germany.
Wow.
And I flew there for 3 years, then married a guy in the Air Force, didn't have a plan again when I was going to get off active duty. And this was when I had first gotten to know him before we were married. And I asked, can I stay on active duty again? Because, no plan. And so they sent me to work they already had my replacement inbound to fly. So they sent me to work at Landstuhl at the hospital. And I worked as an administrative officer there. I reorganized the emergency room so that there was an outpatient clinic and an emergency room operating in the same place. I was responsible for all the administrative people in all the outpatient clinics and responsible for the patient appointment system, none of which I knew how to do before I walked in the door. But I did that for 10 months. And then on the 30th of September, 1988, my last day in the Army, I went to bed and I woke up the next morning as an Air Force spouse.
That is a wild ride. It's amazing, like how different things come into play. Now, before you actually got out, though, how did you make that decision? After all of these different avenues and opportunities, how did you decide? Okay, I'm done now. This chapter is closing, and I need to move differently somewhere else.
Yep, there were 2 things that coincided. Number one, I was not having a good time. I didn't have female role models. When I first got to Germany, I was the only female pilot in any country's military service flying in the southwest area of Germany. There were a few other female helicopter pilots in Germany, but they were all warrant officers. So I had no role models. And it was not a pretty situation between me and some of the male officers in my unit, to include my commanders at one point, a couple of them. And so that was not good. And then I met my husband, and he was an Air Force officer. And so the day I met him, he pinned on first lieutenant, and I was already a captain. So there was a disconnect in how our careers would go. Right. He still had another year or so in Germany, and I needed to go back to the States to go to my advanced course. And so I just decided, I'm not having fun. I'm just going to hang it up.
Yeah.
No plan. I was just a spouse, which, that was my plan, to just be a spouse. I had no idea even what that meant.
Right. But all our military spouses are going in the background. They're like, oh, just a spouse. Got
Right.
it.
And that was the
We
first
hear
thing that I
you.
learned out is there is no such thing as just a spouse.
Exactly, exactly. So shout out to all those military spouses out there because we see the heavy lifting going on. So
Yeah.
so you decide to get out. You don't have direct plans. It's just kind of we're going to figure out where this little boat takes us, right?
Mhm.
So how did that transition actually go? Because you're in the same position we're in when we talk with veterans. Start as early as you can, create a plan, try and figure out where you're going before you have to be there, right? That kind of thing. So how does that work out with you?
So that's the thing, there was no transition program back in 1988,
Yeah.
and my transition was a fail. I used up all my and any leave I would have had for my wedding and my honeymoon, and so I literally worked until the last day,
Uh-huh.
finishing projects on my last day on active duty, and I had no guidance. And my husband worked nights on the ramp. He was an aircraft maintenance officer on F-16s, and so I was not, by the second week of being home alone, I was not a great wife for him to come home to, because I was used to being high speed moving, all the time. But everybody I knew was working during the day. I didn't know any spouses at that point. So we were there in Germany until the middle of December. So I had 2.5 months. And then we moved to Eglin Air Force Base, moved into a moldy, musty, little temporary lodging facility suite. That's generous to call it that. Uh, and we lived there for 31 days because we couldn't afford to buy a house. And at that point, and so we were waiting for base housing,
Right.
and we got our house. We could have moved in on the 30th day, except that the TMO screwed up our household goods delivery, so we had to go back to the TLF for night 31.
Right.
So we spent Christmas there, and that was my first rude awakening to what it can be like to be a military spouse, because we spent Christmas in the TLF, eating Christmas dinner in the TLF by ourselves, because not one person from my husband's unit invited us to do anything with them over Christmas. There was an expectation that we should know how to take care of ourselves. And we were newlyweds and had never PCSed with another person before. And my husband's PCS to Germany was his first. I had done a little bit of traveling, between for my career at that point, but that was really hard, and I was not a nice person, and I tried a variety of things, and I will tell you, my husband really suffered. We had our 2 daughters there, and I didn't realize until they were young adults how much they suffered during those first years with me as their mom in the middle of a military transition.
Mm-hmm.
I did my best, but I had never had the idea to be a wife and mother. That was not my plan as I grew up. Not that my plan had been to be a doctor, but failing out of Dartmouth didn't help that. And so here we were, and so I was not good. But eventually, I tried to be a volunteer with the Red Cross on Eglin, but I was really demanding. I didn't understand about personality styles, and I thought that if people signed up for something, that they should do the training associated with it. No, when you're a volunteer, you don't always do the training with it, and the people that you're volunteering with just have to live with it. But I didn't get that. So then I started a dressmaking business, but I got put on bed rest with our first daughter. Can't sew at a sewing machine when you're on bed rest, so that died. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Longaberger baskets. They're really nice maple baskets. They're made in Ohio. I love baskets. Somebody told me I could sell them and get them at half price, so I did that. Then I had a friend who sold Mary Kay, and she said, Annie, people don't run out of baskets, but their pink bottles get empty. And I was like, ooh.
I'm
I've
sold.
learned Right. And so I was using the product, and I could get my own product at a better price. So I switched to Mary Kay, learned that was my MBT, I call it my MBA OJT, and learned about direct sales, about building a business and building a team, because I had never really had to do that in my career in the positions I had been in. I'd been to leadership training, but I hadn't ever had the opportunity to build a team. So I built a team of 40 women, did drive a free Mary Kay car, even though they don't like that I say that. I'm not a Mary Kay corporate would not be happy that I said that. It's not a free car. They pay, you earn it by making minimum quotas, and then they pay your car payment and your car insurance. And if you miss a quota, then you owe them money. So that's how the free cars work.
Yeah.
They aren't really free. So I did that until my daughters were once again really suffering, because I was sucked into that. My husband was sucked into his job, and they were caught in the middle. And I decided in 1998 that I had to put my daughters first. And I quit Mary Kay overnight and became a full-time stay-at-home homeschool mom.
Right. Ooh, which is a whole other transition for
And
who's done
you
that.
know, nobody believed that I could do it, but I did, and I just gave it all my all, and I grew at the same time, because as I was helping them grow, I found opportunities for myself to grow. Mary Kay had started that, and I'm always grateful for my time there, because that was where my personal growth really started, and I was able to continue to work on me while I was spending time with my daughters. And then my husband retired in 2007. We came from the Pentagon to up by Aberdeen Proving Ground, and I started working with military spouses and veterans then, and realized from watching my husband transition out of the Air Force after his 23-year career that there had to be something more.
Right.
And so in the meantime, I had joined the Maxwell Leadership Certified team with John Maxwell, became one of his first 1,000 certified coaches, trainers, and speakers. And I put together Changing Focus, Moving from We to Me, which uses some Maxwell material, some other material. And we had our first cohort in July of 2018. We finished our 59th, well, actually our 60th cohort, but our 59th numbered cohort this past weekend. And so it is. I was thinking about it this morning as I recorded a video that's going to go out to our community tomorrow. It is just amazing that I always tell people you can have an idea, and if you can articulate that idea, you can bring it to life. And to see my idea from years ago come to fruition now and know the difference that we're making for people is just amazing to me.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk to you about that, because I think there's some things within that our audience definitely needs to hear. But real quick, I want to go back because I feel like this is really vital to a lot of our listeners who are in that transition period. And again, when we talk about transition, we're not just talking about the first exit from the military, right? You have many, many transitions in life. And you mentioned, that you felt bad for your daughters, you felt bad for your husband because of who they got right after you left the service, right? What was it that was going on in you at that time that was kind of having this ripple effect on everyone, as much as you want to share, obviously?
I'm happy to, because a lot of people go through the same thing.
Exactly.
So, I went from my parents' house as a 16-year-old into college with a bunch of kids who were 2 and 4 years older than me, failed at that miserably, scratched my way through college, the rest of my college, and then ended up as an enlisted soldier in the Army. And I was scared that whole time. I had no clue who I was as an individual. I developed, and so from becoming basically a teenager to becoming a soldier, that was all I knew. And I went from understanding what it meant to be an enlisted soldier and an NCO to becoming an officer. And then all of a sudden I was a military spouse and I didn't know anything about that. And I had to figure that out. And I'm always grateful for the wives that came around me because back then it was wives. There weren't any male spouses, um, but who came around me. But I had no idea who Annie Brock was.
Right.
I lived in a total state of confusion mentally. Um, I did a segment several years ago now when we launched our white paper, and I took some glasses of water with food coloring in them, and the levels of the water represented different stages in your career, and I put drops of blue food coloring in them to signify the what goes into your brain from being in the military, how everything just saturates your brain from and I poured 2 gallons of water through the glass that had the least food coloring and water in it. And I never got that glass to come completely
Mm-hmm.
clear.
Right.
And that is, so when you think about the full glass that had all the drops of food coloring and the water, people leave the military with a mind that is not theirs. Their mind belongs to the military, but they're operating in the civilian sector. And so that's why we exist, because I came to understand this. And the DoD mandated transition assistance program is awesome because it fills the DoD need. But
Mm-hmm.
what it doesn't do is it does not address the mindset issues that service members go through. And military spouses go through it too. If you're a young person who marries somebody in the military, you become just as ingrained in the military for many respects as your service member does. And it takes a while, even for military spouses, to eliminate the military thinking from their minds.
Mm-hmm.
So the transition assistance program is focused on making sure people are employed, and that's really good, because we all like to have roofs over our head and we like to feed our kids and clothe our families. And so it's really important to have the tools to do that. But we are whole people and we need to come back to some semblance of that as we leave the military. And so that's why in Changing Focus, Moving from We to Me, we talk about how change works in your brain. We help people develop their individual purpose statement and a vision statement so that they can create a plan to move forward. We help them learn to understand how people perceive them when they communicate and how to recognize those cues in other people. We talk about living an intentional and purposeful life so that you make the choices. You may work full time for somebody else, but that's only a part of your life. You have a whole outside life where you can have hobbies and do fun things, learn things, and be, have a spiritual life. There's so much more to life than just a job. So that's what we do at Changing Focus, and I love it. I have a blast. We welcome people who are currently serving. We welcome military spouses, and we welcome veterans from any era with any kind of discharge, because, for so many people, there was no transition program when they left the military. We want to be there for them. And this weekend, the majority of our cohort was veterans who had been out anywhere from 5 to 22 years.
Right.
And so really exciting.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, and I want to ask you one more thing before I do that, audience. Make sure you're checking in. Follow Annie, connect with her on LinkedIn. Go check out the website, leadertransitioninstitute.org. We definitely want to do that. And then, Annie, I'm going to come back to you for one last question, because this is the big one, right? This is where the rubber meets the road, as they say, right?
Okay.
In your institute, obviously you're talking about a lot of stuff, and we did not have the chance to get through a lot of that today.
No, I'm sorry for that.
No, it's a great story regardless. So everybody go check it out. But I know that you talk a lot about the growth mindset, which is, big on our end too, talking about creativity and hobbies and all of those things. So for those who are in the stage of transition, right? And the focus is benefits and jobs, right? Where's your next job and what benefits do you have? It is a lot bigger than that. This is an entire identity shift for a lot of people. It's a reckoning of all of the pieces that make us human. So when it comes to growth mindset, when it comes to seeking joy, having fun things, what level of importance is that in this transition period? Why do people need to make that a priority just as much as that job search, as the move, as the reconnecting with family?
Well, I've found that doing those outside things are complementary to doing the tasks that are required in transition. And what I've found is that sometimes I could be out on a bike ride or even just taking care of my plants. And the things that I've been contemplating over the previous week or so will just come up in my mind. And they come up in new and different ways and give me a much more open-minded way sometimes of thinking about things. And so I think it's really number one, all of those outside things rest our brains, and our brains need that as much as our brains need sleep. They need the rest from the intense stimulation that working and transitioning from the military give it. And so the rest of the brain for the brain is, and the mind is important, but just the opportunity for things to come up that are marinating in our brain, I think they come up then, and I think it's really critical.
Yes, and social media is not rest.
Oh no,
is not rest.
looking at a screen is not rest.
Not rest.
Rest is getting outside or sewing or doing needlework or taking care of plants. I have a huge sunroom full of plants, and so those, maybe working on model trains, working on a car. Some people love yard work. That's not my thing either. But all of those things, that's what's rest, and you must build time in for them. And the other part of this equation is if you have a family, you do those things with your family.
Right.
Because you can and must rebuild your relationship with your family.
Yeah. And that double duty, that can make a big difference when there's the chaos of all that change. So absolutely. Well, Annie, thank you so much for joining us today. I hate that we didn't get as far as we wanted, but time is still time, and we have to, one rule we have to obey is that time still exists. So for everybody listening, definitely connect with Annie on LinkedIn. Check out the Leader Transition Institute online. Join us in a couple weeks for another episode of Total Transition. And thank you all for joining us here today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.